This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Your customers are value hunters, not just bargain hunters. Many will pay a premium for products or services if they save time, solve problems, make them feel good, or make them more money. The key, though, is finding the value that makes your offering irresistible. Pricing strategist Adam Wallace says for smarter pricing, to make sure you're not leaving money on the table, find out what your customers value and will happily pay more for. But how do you do that? Adam Wallace joins us for this episode of Bizgnus Interviews with some ideas that could help you gain and retain customers. Adam, in your new book, you suggest that value is perhaps as important as the price of something. Tell us what you mean by that.
I would even say it's two sides of the same coin. I believe that in order to be able to raise your price, you have to gain additional insight on what your best customers actually truly value about what you provide them. And in my experience with working with a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses, there's often a bit of a white space between why people create amazing, a lot of times innovative new products and services out into the market, and then why their actual best customers end up buying it. And to the degree that there's a mismatch, there's unmonetized value just being left on the table.
Why is it? Are these founders and business leaders just too involved in the weeds, getting the product out the door, so to speak?
No, I was actually fascinated by this, and this is why I've been studying it for 20 years, because those founders are actually doing what they need to do. They value a better solution. And so they're driving down, innovating, creating something intriguing for the marketplace. But then it's kind of this ironic thing where people will only pay for what they value. And so it's that sometimes it's actually a little bit humbling when I go into a company. And now what I do is I own a portfolio of companies that I go in and improve the pricing power on. And it's almost always this sort of moment of like, they will pay just for that one thing. Like I'm offering, a song and dance of 10 different value propositions here. And you mean that one thing? That's what they'll actually pay twice as much as what I'm currently charging and giving them, whatever the number is, but giving them all of this service. But no, this one thing is actually motivating them to be your customer.
We are doing this recording a day after Southwest Airlines announced that after 50 odd years in business, it's giving up its cattle call seating, and you can actually reserve a seat for an extra price.
Hmm.
Why do you think it took them so long to join every other airline on the planet in that?
Well, actually, I would kind of relate to that as it was an interesting differentiation novelty in the marketplace. That at the time, and they've done incremental steps. If you actually book a business class ticket, you're 1 through 15 on the A group already. So there was already sort of little groups of like, if you want that front left seat in the first row because you're a business flyer, you already had access to that already. But I think a lot of times what happens to growing companies is they think about it this way. When you found a company and you're building it up, you instantly have a really good offering, the way you manufacture it, and customer fit. And in order to scale up, you have to have that be a scalable fit. And as you go up. And so you continue to grow and build different sort of sub departments to kind of reinforce the structures of being able to produce your product more reliable, often a little bit more economics at scale. But as you do that, you also put in sort of different departments that ensure your reliability. But the trouble is no company gets to operate in a completely static environment. What the business environment in particular that you're operating in, and what your customers actually care about always evolve. And so even though you have like a really good match that allowed you to create a successful company to begin with time, those other two things are going to evolve. And then you've kind of created this structure that kind of calcified, appropriately so in the early days, but now it leaves you with a little bit of a dilemma called, is that how we would do it today? And so part of my case when I say revalue, it doesn't just include looking at the marketplace for your price. It's actually looking at your customers to understand what they value and identify, have we kind of put ourselves into a default structure that no longer matches what people want to pay for today? And if so, what do we have to do about it internally to adjust that? And so I think what you see with Southwest is just another example where they finally got to the point where, okay, even though that's been part of our identity for a long time, it's no longer proving the economic return that it once did.
In your book, you mentioned something about gatekeepers.
Hmm.
Would you explain what you mean by gatekeeper and what do they do and why should we care?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people fall into what I would kind of consider pricing riptides. They get kind of stuck into a slipstream, so to speak, and lose out on money that could otherwise be bottom line earnings. And one of the slipstreams that I often see is people kind of get into a loss leader mindset when they're developing business, particularly in service firms and stuff like that. They try to what they do is a really important thing, which is if it's the first time somebody's buying from you, they usually need to have an offering that's a little bit smaller, not a full commitment. Like the timeline kind of needs to be shorter on it. So there is always a need to have a good initial right size offer. But a lot of people fall into the trip of mimicking HP and trying to sell their equivalent of a printer for cost or below cost, thinking that they'll be able to then raise the prices later. But what it happens is they actually attract people who are looking for that price point and then find it a very uphill battle afterwards to be able to kind of translate them into higher priced products and services. So the idea of a gatekeeper comes from overlanding. If you ever hop in a four-wheel drive SUV and you go over the mountain roads and things like that, there's a term they use in that a recreational enterprise called a gatekeeper. And a gatekeeper is something that's at the beginning of the trail that could easily be, it's like an obstacle you have to drive over, but it could easily be taken out as part of regular trail maintenance, but they don't. They leave it there because it's a vivid demonstration that says, look, if you're in a car and you have a concern about driving over this, you're not going to like what you see in 5 or 6 miles down the road where it can be like a narrow track on the side of a mountain that you actually can't turn around and the only way out is to go over it. So they leave these sort of like, okay, let me just show you what you're about to get yourself into as you go down the thing. And I find, at least for my portfolio companies, there's always a bit of a right size gatekeeper to build in your initial offering to people. Just because it's an easy to say yes to bite-sized chunk doesn't mean it can't be good margin. And it's really important to make sure you've priced it appropriately. So you have somebody who will find the rest of your products and services at the price point you intended to sell them very valuable.
You have gotten into what has to be the niche or niche of niche business advisories. How did you do that and why?
No, it's actually a really simple story in a certain sense. So I used to be a corporate fixer for large companies. So let's say you were building a $15 billion facility in the middle of nowhere and you have multiple joint ventures. And, it takes about 5 years to build one of those. And you're starting to run over budget. And of course, and over budget and over schedule. And of course, every day that you're running, it costs you about $1 million to have construction on site. And you're missing out about $2 million of revenue. Or let's say you run the fifth largest bank in the US and you have a security vulnerability and you have a SaaS team in there trying to implement and solve it, but you actually have 3 different SaaS vendors who are creating a custom solution and they can't create it in time to eliminate the vulnerability. So I was the guy who would go in and help turn that around and fix those issues and reduce the things. And the way I did it was really, really simple. It wasn't about executing the project better. because you usually, like at those stakes, you didn't get a seat on the team without being really good at your job. So you actually had these teams of experts who really knew what they did. But when I would go in, what I would see is a disconnect between the economic drivers, or sort of the business case of why we said yes to implementing this, and then all of the things that different teams rightfully line up as a project manager. What does a good project, what does a good software look like that we should deliver? And ideally, those things, there should be no disconnect. But naturally, what happens over time is there's usually, in that same way that I described with you and your customers and your product, there becomes this disconnect between the two. And I discovered that if you are able to reduce that disconnect and actually identify, okay, what is the, not, I wouldn't say common ground, but I would say, what is the common objective that would allow the great execution and the economic value, even though on day one, we would have never said that. But today, we are where we are going forward. How can we capture that economic value? And what is it? And so it allowed us to turn around those projects way, way faster. And I worked with a team of experts who were really extraordinarily good at that with a long career. But at the same time, I had friends who knew I did something in business. And so they kept on saying, hey, come look at my business. Hey, come walk with me a day. Just tell me what you think I should do to kind of improve. And I saw the same thing between what they produced and what their best customers were buying. And then after doing it a couple of times, well, it was just a couple of days on the side of my desk having fun with some friends of like tweaking their business model. And yet like 12 months later, they would double their revenue, or they would, like increase their margins by 50%. I thought, oh, well, I'll take a couple little stakes in this. And now a friend would say it. It's like, oh, I'll help you do it. But, if you go over 20%, just give me a little finder's fee, a little something in there. And so after about 5 or 6 years, I realized I had an executive level salary just doing 20% walk off the side of my desk. And so I decided, hey, there's something here. I really enjoy it. It allows me to work with a lot of people I admire and respect. Let me just start doing that full time.
It sounds like as if the Wright brothers had invented the airplane by looking at a bird flying by their park bench one day. I wonder if you would share some of the common mistakes that
Hmm.
businesses make when it comes to pricing and value, and
Yeah.
tell us how they can be avoided.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing, especially if you're a business owner, and so say you're under $100 million, I would say almost always people haven't Pareto optimized their customer base, meaning they cast too wide of a net on their customer portfolio, and they end up pricing themselves to the lowest common denominator, especially on service firms. Right. So if you go into almost any service firm and you say, which customers do you have that take the most of your time? They're probably not the ones who spend the most of the money and kind of inversed. And so there's a lot of them where it's like, even if you raise your price and lose, let's say 10% of your customer base, but it's the right 10%, you'll be better off just if you lost them altogether. Like it can be a little bit humbling and shocking sometimes because people really do want to offer good service and take care of people. But in doing so, they sometimes don't realize who they truly create the most value for. And so they're leaving money on the table with those people while servicing people that are actually at the upper ends already and are already starting to complain or require a lot more resources to service. So I would say that's kind of one. You cast too wide of a net. Like now, because of, no longer are you a local CPA. You can provide CPA service all of the United States. Now, you might have specialties in certain states or whatever the case is, but all addressable markets have so increased. If you're below $100 million, you can afford to have like a really nice niche. I one time built an entire $20 million book of business off of 75 prime buyers. There was only 75 people in the world who needed that service. But the good news is that the company already knew who 25 of the 75 was. So at that point, and of course, those 25 knew the other 50. So it becomes a pretty easy way to do business development when you can kind of accept, no, there's really only, now that doesn't mean you don't get a phone call and you don't sell a service if somebody's coming inbound to you. But at the same time, when you become very, very targeted about who you truly unlock the most value for, you can afford to get a disproportionate returns on your investment of marketing and sales and so on. So that would be the first one, narrowing the scope on it. I think we already kind of talked about the second one, which would be your prospects actually don't value your offering as much as you do. Most prospects are seeing what you offer as a instrument, about sort of like a pathway or a tool to get over an obstacle in their way of getting to where they want to get to. What is actually motivating them to buy isn't your product. It's when your product shows up as a tool to get them where they want to be. And a lot of times people kind of resist that because the buyer is using sort of a heuristic to judge what you offer. And it's a mismatch between what you're passionate about building. And so to the degree, so at a certain point, sometimes it's very easy for, especially if the owner is also the salesperson, to say, no, you don't understand. Here's what we really do. In which you're kind of creating a little bit of cognitive dissonance with your buyer, and you're having them make a judgment call prematurely about your products and service, and they sort of off-ramp the engagement process. So I would say that's the second one, of not appreciating that the actual buyer values something different. Yeah.
Now, we don't want to necessarily go through all of them because we need to have you tell our listeners and viewers the name of your brand new book.
It's called Revalue, Raise Your Prices and Build Your Legacy.
And tell us where our listeners and viewers can get more information. I know you have a website.
I do. The website is adamwallace.com. Or you can just search in Amazon Revalue book, and it'll be the #1. It just debuted #1 in microeconomics and marketing this week.
That's very good for being out for just a few days. Remarkable success. What would you like to add, Adam, that we haven't talked about?
I think I would just make the observation that I find when it comes to most people's great products and service, they've gotten about 95% of everything right. So when I'm talking about revaluing, I'm not talking about recreating things from scratch. I'm not talking about re-engineering things. I'm talking about taking a few little shifts in, hey, what truly motivates my best customers to buy? And what if I sort of double down on making sure we're honed a little bit more to deliver a little bit closer to it? And when taking that approach, we've seen just a disproportionate level of returns compared to any other sort of efficiency or marketing or ROIs and so many of the standard things that we kind of expect.
You've been listening to the Bizgnus Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@bizgnus.com. That's bizgnus.com. Thanks for listening.